Please join me in welcoming Secretary David Bernhardt.
Thank you very much. Please sit down. It's a great honor to be here. For those of you that don't know me, as Kristen mentioned, I started out working for Gail Norton, who was a staff attorney here, and she had such an affinity for her experience in Mountain States that literally every meeting I had with her, and I had a lot, would begin with, what are we doing for the little guy? What are we doing for the rancher, the miner? What are we doing for the little guy? And unfortunately, at times, we weren't able to do as much as we wanted, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. Obviously, since that time, Mountain States has changed and expanded a little bit. Your portfolio is much bigger with the Second Amendment initiatives and civil rights. So before I begin talking, I'm going to not make a presumption about Interior. I'm not going to make a presumption that everybody in the room knows something about the Department of the Interior. So I'm going to summarize Interior's past very, very quickly. Interior was formed in 1849, just as all great agencies are formed. It was basically formed because the Secretary of the Treasury looked around and said, I have this component that is a complete disaster, the General Lands Office, and I think what we ought to do is take this dead cat and put it on somebody else's porch by creating a department. So he went to Congress to do that. And while he was proposing that, to get rid of this General Lands Office, the War Department said, this is a great idea. We have this program associated with Indian Affairs, and we think it would be perfect merged with the General Land Sales Office. And the people who run the patent program said, we're in, let's send patent there, and pensions for veterans. And so within a few days, at the very end of the Congress, suddenly the Department of the Interior was created, and it was a hodgepodge and a mess. And it's remained that way since that day. Today, the Department of the Interior manages about 1 in 5 acres of land in the United States. I used to tell President Trump it's the largest property management company in the world, and he'd say, well, that was my company. And I say, no. Basically, it's responsible for administering 1 in 5 acres of land in the United States. A lot of stuff happens on that land. About 20%, about 24% of oil production occurs on federal land and waters, 11% of natural gas, lots of mining. I had an inspector general once tell me, the problem, David, is there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff on that land, and everybody wants it, which also means that it's been the home to most scandals that you can think of, from Teapot Dome all the way down. When I visited with the president about the Department of the Interior job as secretary, he said, well, what should I know? And I said, well, the one thing you should know is anybody who wants this job has no idea what it is. Like, you should not want it. So he gave it to me. But in all seriousness, when it comes to water, when you're the Secretary of the Interior, your perspective is bounded by the controversies that happen in the various areas. And so I will talk a little bit about what I view as the present and the future of those controversies. And the present, when I was at the department, I viewed it as a series of buckets, and here's the way the buckets work in terms of controversy. In the Northwest, you have the Klamath situation, which is really an incredible challenge. When you look at the facts there, here are the facts. You have one species of fish in a lake that can't have low lake levels. You have another species of fish down the road through the salmon. You got to deliver water to refuges. You have the farmers that actually are probably the most entitled to the water. You have a state of Oregon that has no adjudication. It's a mess. That's true. Oregon doesn't have any adjudication. It's stunning in a way, isn't it? I mean, like if you're from Colorado, you'd be like, how does that happen? You have the Central Valley, which is the other big bucket of challenges in the water space. It's basically the Central Valley Project and the State Water Project combined operations, another ESA matter. In that situation, you're talking about the water supply for some of the most productive agriculture in the United States, combined with, I think, about 22 million people benefiting from the State Water Project. And you have a couple of species that are listed, primarily the Delta smelt and a series of salmon. And then you have the FCRPS up here, as you folks know very well, and that litigation for the Columbia River Basin historically has been dominated by Endangered Species Act issues, coupled with the needs of Bonneville Power and the dams. And basically the solution to that over the years has been how much money can Bonneville throw at folks to buy collaboration. And then of course you have the Colorado River, which is its own ecosystem. In this way, the Colorado River is not driven by species issues. The controversies on the Colorado River are not driven by species, they're not driven by litigation. And historically, they've been solved with collaboration amongst the states, with encouragement from the Secretary of the Interior. And basically, the Secretary's position rarely changes between parties. And that may very well be because many secretaries in the last 70 years have been from the Colorado River Basin. Salazar, Halland, Babbitt, myself, and so I think that has had an influence on that particular basin. But all of them are challenged right now, and here's fundamentally why. People think it's about the lack of water, and in a way it is. But it's also because of the lack of the willingness of political appointees to dig into the science and the facts and the details and challenge some of the underlying assumptions that are in the science. And the reason I raise that is because I want to step back a minute and explain to you my perspective on working in the executive branch. And when I served in the Bush administration, in general, the career civil servants, many of them wanted to work with you collaboratively. Many didn't. And if they didn't, they just simply didn't work. You know, they didn't, but you think, well, that's not good. That's not good for the country. In the Trump administration, 20 years later, there was a remarkable shift in that. And here was the shift. Not only did folks not want to participate, which is fine, but they wanted to do the opposite affirmatively, which is problematic. And you don't have to believe me about this because a lady wrote a wonderful book that I encourage everybody to read. Her name is Deborah Briggs, and she was one of the #2 folks involved in the COVID pandemic response effort. And she's a nice lady, and she wrote this book, and she lays out in the book what she called her workaround. And here's what it was. The vice president's office had a policy that they wanted to see in the materials that she was developing and providing to governors. And as part of that, as all managers tend to do, there was some editing that would take place. And the editing would happen and the documents would go back to her. And what she would do is she would make the changes that were edited, but then she would take the changes that they didn't like and that had been edited, and she would put them in different places in the document. She called that a workaround, and she viewed it as a way to, it was clear as long as it got through the process, it was good to go as long as it got through the process. It was kind of a game of catch me if you can. Now, I happen to call that insubordination. But what's interesting about it is not that she did it. What's interesting about it is that she wrote a book and she said, look what I did and what a good thing it was. Now, on one hand, you can look at that and say that's admirable. Here's the question I would pose to you. If we have representative government, we have an election. And when that election occurs, there's a winner. And if we have 2 million civil servants who decide that they only have to participate when one side is in office versus the other, what do we have? I say we have a problem, okay? And that is a reality that we have in the Trump administration. And it was absolutely extraordinary to me. Now, what did it mean? It didn't mean we sat down and cried. I mean, we did that a little bit, I imagine. But what it really meant, and this is why I'm really pleased to be here tonight and talk, is what it really meant is that we had to work harder, okay? We had to have people in positions that were willing to dig into the details. We had to have people that were competent and confident in their understanding of the law and the policy and the facts. And we had to have people that were courageous enough to make a decision. But here's what the most important thing we had to have. We had to have a president who was willing to back us when we made a decision. And I can assure you that the remarkable difference between my experience with President Trump and President Bush was that at the end of the day, President Trump's guidance to us and willingness to have our back the minute things got a little hot was absolutely incredible. The other thing that he did as a manager that I found stunning, and I found this out, I took over the Department of the Interior from, I was deputy secretary and I became acting secretary on January 2nd, 2019. And that was a great moment to take advantage, become a secretary, because it was in the middle of a government shutdown. So it's like taking on walking onto a ship that's empty but going somewhere, but nobody knows where. And so I get on, and one of the things that happens in government shutdowns is a lot of folks try to make a lot of attention of the difficulties in national parks. And the Obama administration actually really was very aggressive in like closing everything at a park to highlight to highlight the fact that the government was shut down. As a matter of fact, the World War II Memorial, which is actually an open area, if you've ever been to the World War II Memorial on the National Mall, they actually put fence up and tried to barricade people like during the shutdown. And it was a big controversy. And Ryan Zinke, when he was secretary, remembered it because he'd been congressman during that period of time. So we had a policy of trying to be completely accessible. And the problem with the policy was the Park Service stayed open a long time and no one was like managing the trash or anything, and things got a little out of hand. And I knew that the Park Service had $300 million in its back pocket from recreation fees. And I had looked at the law and I was pretty confident that I could take that money during a shutdown and use it to pay for folks to come back at work to pick up the trash and do the stuff that you need to do to maintain the facilities, and we could still keep things open. But I knew that it was going to make folks a little excited at the White House. And in my one visit with the president about the job, he had told me I reported to him, which I thought was a little bit of a joke, but you know, I'd explained to him I understood the Constitution, but like, who do I really report to? And he had basically said, you report to me. So I'm in this job, I've been there a couple days. I decided to call the president and tell him what I'm going to do. And I call over and I say, hey, to the secretary, I say, hey, I'm the junior varsity guy at the Department of the Interior. I really just need to talk to whoever I actually report to, but it's a little unclear to me. And I have something I need the president to know because I'm about to reopen the parks and he's going to read about it. And she said to me, the president will call you back in 15 minutes. And I had worked for the Bush administration for 8 years. And there were certain instances in those 8 years where it had taken the Secretary of the Interior 9 and 10 months to get meetings with the president on an issue. So I was pretty skeptical that I'd get a phone call back. But I sat there and waited 15 minutes, nothing happened, so no surprise, right? But on 20 minutes, the phone did ring. And sure enough, it was the president. And I told him what I was going to do. And he listened and he said, you know, why are you doing this now? I said, what do you mean, why am I doing it now? I just went through the whole thing. And he said, well, we've been shut down for several days. Why didn't you do this sooner? I said, well, that's a pretty good question, a little complicated. I kind of knew at the job, kind of cut me a break, you know. But the truth of the matter was, his point was, number one, you should have been on top of this and get going. And then secondly, he said, when you do it, make sure you said I told you to do it, which was a complete back, right? That was awesome. And then he said, you know, just when you have something that makes sense, just do it. Just do it. And that is the way I was able to run the Department of the Interior for the next 2 years. It was like serving in the Eisenhower administration, to be honest with you. It was a stark contrast. And what that meant that we were able to do is move much more quickly on certain things. Now, why do I tell you all that? I tell you that because let's fast forward to the present. In the present, whether we like it or not, here's the situation as I see it, and you all can disagree. We have a president who was very clear about his policies. He announced that, like, look, it's climate, my climate policy is more important than my energy or economic policy. I mean, he said that during the campaign. Maybe nobody believed him, but he said it. He said he was going to do all these things on public lands, like, you know, try and stop leasing. He even said at one point he would stop permitting. He's been knocked around in the courts a little bit on it, but he's been, you know, that's what he said. And then what did he do? He went out and got the personnel to do it. He went and got the most activist appointees on the planet, and I don't make that up. If you don't believe me, there's a website called www.insidebidensbasement.org, okay? Insidebidensbasement.org. And you can go look at their entire background and you can judge it from yourself. But what you'll see is that they filled these agencies with activists, okay? So he had a plan, he put a lot of activists in it, and you know what? They're moving forward. They're moving forward, and they're moving forward aggressively. And they're going to continue to move forward aggressively. In 32 days, we're going to have an election. My bet is that the House goes Republican, 25 to 30 seats gets pick up maybe 51 to 52 in the Senate. But having been in the department, my expectation is that they'll just put the pedal to the metal and push forward as aggressively as they can. And that's why elections matter. And it's also why organizations like yours really, really matter. And I tell you that because here's the reality. If, as Governor Little said, if the next president that comes in is willing to have the courage to make decisions and is willing to drive hard and puts capable people in place, it is absolutely amazing what people could do within a 4-year period of time. Whether they choose to do that or not may or not be the case. But here's what we did in the Trump administration. What we tried to do deliberately is we tried to roll out deregulatory efforts that were addressing long-standing conflicts like the Endangered Species Act, okay? We did that. Richard Pombo tried that during the Bush administration. Did you get a little pushback from the Bush administration, Richard? A little bit, maybe? I think you might have yelled at me about that a time or two. So that's the truth, okay? So we went out and did that. We took on, we deregulated NEPA. I mean, we tried to change the NEPA regulations, and we did. They actually stood up in court. We did that so that we made some modifications in terms of Antiquities Act proclamations. So the next time around, when the next president's there, the next White House will not have the excuse that no one can do it. They'll have to make the choice. If they don't want to do it, and they want to tell the people that, that's fine. But here's what I learned through my government service. The American people, overall, are an incredibly wise, good, and people that will ultimately make the right decision. They will ultimately make the decisions that drive things in the right way, and they can be informed transparently that, you know, there's a choice. Got to make the choice. And I have complete faith that they can move this country in the right direction. Complete faith. And so I'm emboldened about the future. You know, for me, the next administration is only 832 days away. And that's not that long, in all honesty. It's not that long. And there is a cadre. There's a cadre of people who served, young people who served in the Trump administration, who will want to go back in the next Republican administration. Gail Norton taught me this. Gail Norton said, you spend a lot of time with the young people, and she was, when she was saying that, she was trying to help me. But there's a lot of folks that will go back to these administrations, and they will have an expectation that people want stuff done. Because we had a leader who wanted results and pushed us to deliver those results. And so I'm excited about that. So with that, I'll shut up. I'm happy to take any questions if you want.